Continuing where I left off, chapter 18. Next day, Prince Andrea thought of the ball, but his mind did not dwell on it for long. Yes, it was a very brilliant ball, and then, yes, that little Rostova is very charming. There's something fresh, original, un-Petersburg-like about her that distinguished her. That was all the thought he gave to the night before, and after his morning tea he set to work. But either from fatigue or want of sleep he was ill disposed for work, and could get nothing done. He kept criticizing his own work, which was not unusual with him, and was glad when he heard a visitor arrive. The visitor was Bitsky, a man who was a member of various committees of every society in Petersburg, and was an assiduous Petersburg newsmonger, a passionate admirer of Speransky and the new ideas. He was one of those men who chose their opinions like their clothes, according to the fashion, but for that very reason appeared to be the most fervent partisans of the new trends. Scarcely waiting to take off his hat, he bustled into Prince Andrei's room and instantly began talking. He had just learned the particulars of that morning's sitting of the Council of State opened by the Tsar, and recounted them with great enthusiasm. The Emperor's speech was extraordinary. It had been a speech such as is made only by the constitutional monarchs. The Tsar plainly stated that the Council and Senate are estates of the realm. He said that the government must rest not on arbitrary authority, but on firm principles. He also said that the fiscal system must be reorganized, and a public accounting given of moneys. Bitsky declared, emphasizing certain words and opening his eyes significantly. Yes, today's events mark an epoch, the greatest in our history, he concluded. Prince Andrei listened to the account of the opening of the State Council, an event he had awaited with such impatience, and to which he had attached so much importance, and was amazed, and now that it was an accomplished fact, it has not only left him unmoved, but seemed less than insignificant. He listened with quiet irony to Bisky's enthusiastic account. A very simple thought occurred to him. Was it to me or to Bisky, what can it matter to us what the Emperor is pleased to say in the council? Can all that make me any happier, any better? And this simple reflection suddenly destroyed all Prince Andrei's former interest in the reforms that were being implemented. That very day he was to dine at Speransky with just a few friends, his host had said when inviting him. The prospect of this dinner in the intimate home circle of the man he so greatly admired had seemed very interesting to Prince Andrei, especially as he had not yet seen Speransky in his domesticated surroundings. But now he had lost all desire to go. At the appointed hour, however, he arrived at Speransky's modest home in Tversky's gardens, in the parqueted dining room of this small house, remarkable for its immaculate cleanliness, suggesting that of a monastery. Prince Andrei, who was a little late, found the members of Speransky's intimate circle already assembled at 5 o'clock. There were no ladies present except Speransky's little daughter, who had a long face like her father, and the child's governess. The other guests were Gervais, Magnitsky, and Stolypin. From the vestibule Prince Andrei heard loud voices and a precise, resonant laugh, a laugh such as one hears on the stage. Someone, it sounded like Speransky, was ejaculating a clear ha 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 ha. Prince Andrei had never before heard Speransky laugh, and this shrill, ringing laughter from a statesman made a strange impression on him. He went into the dining room. The whole company was standing between two windows at a small table laid with hors d'oeuvres. Speransky, wearing a grey frock coat with a star, and apparently the same white waistcoat and high white stock he had worn at the famous sitting on the Council of State, stood surrounded by his guests and looking jovial. Maninitsky, addressing himself to his host, was relating an anecdote, and Speransky was laughing beforehand at what he was going to say. Just as Prince Andrei entered the room, Maninitsky's words were again drowned in laughter. Stolypin, munching a piece of bread and cheese, uttered a deep bass guffaw. Jervis laughed softly with a hissing chuckle, and Speransky uttered his shrill, precise laugh. Still laughing, he held out his soft white hand to Prince Andrei. "Very glad to see you, Prince," he said. "One moment," he went on, turning to Manisky and interrupting his story. "We have made an arrangement. This is to be a dinner for recreation, not a word about business." And he again gave his attention to the narrator and began to laugh afresh. Prince Andrei looked at the mirthful Speransky with wonder and melancholy disillusionment. It seemed to him that this was not Speransky but some other man. All that had formerly impressed him as being mysterious and fascinating in Speransky suddenly became clear and unattractive. At dinner the conversation did not cease for an instant, and seemed to consist of the contents of a joke book. Mandinsky had hardly finished his story when someone else expressed a readiness to relate something even funnier. Most of the anecdotes, if not about officialdom, concerned people in the service. It appeared that in this circle the insignificance of those people was so conclusively accepted that the only possible attitude toward them was one of good humor ridicule. Speransky told at how the consul, that morning, a deaf statesman, when asked his opinion, replied that he thought so too. Jervis gave a long account of an incident that had to do with census, remarkable for the stupidity of all concerned. Stolypin, stuttering, broke in and began talking of the abuses under the former order of things, with a fervor that threatened to give a serious turn to the conversation. Manensky started twitting him about his vehemence. Jervis intervened with a joke, and the conversation reverted to its frivolous tone. Apparently, Speransky liked to rest after his labors and divert himself in a circle of friends, and his guests, understanding his wish, tried to amuse him while enjoying themselves. But their gaiety seemed forced with mirthless to Prince Andrei. Speransky's high-pitched voice struck him unpleasantly, and his insistent laughter had a false ring that grated on him. Prince Andrei did not laugh and consequently feared he would dampen the spirits of the company. But no one noticed that he was not in harmony with the general mood. They all seemed to be enjoying themselves enormously. He made several attempts to join in the conversation, but each time his remarks were tossed aside like a cork by water, and he was incapable of bandying jest with him. There was nothing wrong or out of place in what they said. It was witty and might even have been amusing, but it lacked a certain something that is the salt of mirth, something they were not even aware existed. After dinner, Speransky's daughter and her governess left the table. Speransky kissed the little girl and stroked her hair with his white hand, and this gesture too seemed natural to Prince Andrei. The men remained at the table, sitting over their port English fashion. In the midst of a conversation that had arisen about Napoleon's affairs in Spain, which they were unanimously approving, Prince Andrei voiced a contrary opinion. Speransky smiled, and clearly wishing to prevent the conversation from taking a disagreeable turn, told a story that was quite irrelevant. For a few moments all were silent. Having sat some time at the table, Speransky corked up a bottle of wine, handed it to a servant, and got up. "Good wine is hard to come by these days," he remarked. The others rose, and still talking loudly went into the drawing room. Speransky was handed two envelopes brought by a courier. He took them to his study. As soon as he left the room the general merriment subsided, and the guests began to converse soberly and quietly with one another. "And now for the recitation," said Speransky, returning from his study. "An amazing talent," he said to Prince Andrei. Magnitsky immediately assumed a pose and commenced reciting some humorous verses in French which he had composed about certain well-known people in Petersburg. Several times he was interrupted by applause. When the recitation was over, Prince Andrei went to Speransky and took his leave. "Where are you off so early?" asked Kerensky. "I promised to be at soiree." When he reached home, Prince Andrei began to look back on his life in Petersburg during the last 4 months, seeing it in a new light. He thought of the efforts he had made, the people he had tried to see, the history of his project for the reform of army regulations, which had been accepted for consideration, but which they were trying to shelve them because another plan, an extremely poor one, had already been prepared and presented to the Tsar. He thought of the meetings of the committees of which Berg was a member, and recalled the conscientious and prolonged deliberations on every point of form and procedure, and the assiduous and summary evasion of all that related to the substance of the business. He remembered his work on the legal code, and how painstakingly he had translated the articles of the Roman and French codes into Russian, and he felt ashamed. Then he vividly pictured Bogucharov, his pursuits in the country, his journey to Ryazan, thought of his peasants, and drawn the village elder, and mentally applying to them the personal rights he had worked at dividing into sections. He marveled how he could have spent so much time on such futile work. Chapter 19. Next day, Prince Andrei paid calls on several people he had not visited before, among them the Rostovs, with whom he had renewed his acquaintance at the ball. Apart from considerations of politeness, which necessitated the call, he had a strong desire to see in her own home that original, vivacious young girl who had left him with such pleasant memories. Natasha was one of the first to receive them. She was wearing a dark blue everyday dress, in which Prince Andrei thought she looked even prettier than in her ball gown. She and all the family welcomed him cordially and simply, as an old friend. The whole family, which Prince Andrei had once judged severely, now seemed to him to consist of an excellent, simple, kindly people. The hospitality and good nature of the old count, which in Petersburg struck one as particularly gracious, were such that Prince Andrei could not refuse to stay to dinner. Yes, he thought, they are excellent people, but they haven't the slightest idea what a treasure they possess in Natasha. However, they are good, kind, and form the best possible background for this remarkably poetic, enchanting girl, who is bubbling with life. In Natasha, Prince Andrei was conscious of a special world pervaded with unknown joys and wholly alien to him, a strange world which even in the avenue at Otradon and at the window on that moonlight night had begun to tantalize him. Now it piqued him no longer, was no longer an alien world. Having entered it himself, he was finding new delights in it. After dinner, at Prince Andrei's request, Natasha went to the clavichord and began singing. Prince Andrei stood at the window talking to the ladies and listening to her. Suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, he fell silent, feeling choked by tears, a thing he would not have believed possible for him. He looked at Natasha as she sang, and something new and joyous stirred in his soul. He felt happy and at the same time sad. He had absolutely nothing to weep about yet. Yet he was ready to weep. For what? For his past love? For the little princess? For his lost illusions? His hopes for the future? Yes and no. The chief thing that made him feel like weeping was the sudden, acute sense of the terrible contrast between something infinitely great and indefinable existing within him, and that narrow, corporeal something that he, and even she, was. The contrast rejoiced him as she sang. As soon as Natasha had finished singing, she went up to him and asked him how he liked her voice. Having put the question, she became embarrassed, realizing that it was something she ought not to have asked. He looked at her, smiling, and said that he liked her singing as he liked everything she did. It was late in the evening when Prince Andrei left the Rostovs. He went to bed from habit, but soon realized that he could not sleep. He lit his candle and sat up in bed, then laid down again, not in the least perturbed by his sleepiness. His soul was so full of a new and joyful sensation that he felt as if he had just emerged from a stuffy room into the open air. It never occurred to him that he was in love with Natasha. He was not thinking about her, he was only picturing her to himself, and as a consequence all life appeared in a new light. Why do I struggle and strive in this narrow, restricted frame, when life, all life and its joys is open to me, he asked himself. And for the first time, and for the first time for a long time while he began making plans for the future, he decided that he must personally attend to his son's education by finding a tutor and putting the boy in his charge. Then he ought to retire from the service and go abroad, see England, Switzerland, Italy. I must make the most of my liberty while I feel such youth and vitality in me, he said to himself. Pierre was right when he said, one must believe in the possibility of happiness in order to be happy. And now I do believe in it. Let the dead bury the dead. While one has life, one must live and be happy, he thought. Chapter 20. One morning, Colonel Adolf Berg, whom Pierre knew as he knew everyone in Moscow and Petersburg, called on him, wearing a brand new uniform and with his hair pompaded and brushed over his temples as the Emperor Alexander Pavlovich wore his. I have just been to see the Countess, your wife, and was most disappointed that she could not grant my request. But I hope, Count, that I shall be more fortunate with you, he said with a smile. Was it you wish, Colonel? I am at your service. I am not quite settled in my new apartment, Count, Berg announced, obviously convinced that this information could not fail to delight him, and therefore I was hoping to arrange a little soiree for my own and my wife's friends. He smiled still more affably. I want to ask the Countess and you to do me the honor of coming to us for a cup of tea and supper. Only the Countess Elaine Vassilyevna, who considered such people as the Berg beneath her, could be cruel enough to refuse such an invitation. Berg explained so explicitly why he wanted to gather a small and select company at his new apartment, and why this would give him pleasure, and why, though he grudged spending money on cards or any disreputable like that, he was prepared to run into some expense for the sake of good society, that Pierre could not refuse, and promised to come. But not too late, Count, if I may venture to beg of you. 10 minutes to 8, if you please. We shall make up a rubber. Our general is coming. He is very kind to me. We shall have a little supper, Count, so you will do me the favor. Contrary to his habit of being late, on that evening Pierre arrived at the Bergs' house at a quarter to 8 instead of 10 minutes to 8. The Bergs, having made every provision for their party, were ready to receive their guests. They were sitting in their bright, new, clean study, which was newly furnished and embellished with little busts and pictures. Berg, tightly buttoned into his new uniform, sat near his wife, explaining to her that one always could and should cultivate the acquaintance of people above one, that being the only real satisfaction of having friends. You can always pick up something, ask for something. You see how my life has gone since my first promotion. Berg reckoned his life not by years but by promotions. My former comrades are still nothing, while I am only waiting for a vacancy to be made a regimental commander, and I have the happiness of being your husband. He rose and kissed Vera's hand, stopping on the way to straighten a turned-up corner of the carpet. And how have I acquired all this? Chiefly by knowing how to choose my acquaintances. And it goes without saying, of course, that one must be conscientious and methodical. Berg smiled with a sense of his own superiority over a weak woman, and paused, reflecting that this dear wife of his was after all but a frail woman, who would never be able to comprehend all that constituted a man's dignity, what it meant, man zu sein. Vera, too, was smiling with a sense of superiority over her good, worthy husband, who, like all men in her opinion, had a mistaken view of life. Berg, judging by his wife, considered all women weak and foolish, and Vera, judging by her husband alone and generalizing from her observations of him, supposed that all men, while being selfish, conceited, and utterly devoid of understanding, ascribed common sense to none but themselves. Berg stood up and, embracing his wife with care so as not to crush her lace tippet, for which he had paid a good price, kissed her full on the lips. "The only thing is, we mustn't have children too soon," he said, pursuing an association of ideas which he was unconscious. "No," replied Vera, "I wouldn't want that. We must live for society." "Princess Yusupova was wearing one exactly like yours," said Berg, indicating her tippet with a contented, happy smile. Just then Count Beskov was announced. Husband and wife exchanged complacent smiles, each mentally taking credit for this visit. "See what comes of knowing how to make acquaintances," thought Berg. "That's what comes of knowing how to conduct oneself." "Now please don't interrupt me when I'm entertaining the guests," said Vera, "because I know what is of interest to each of them and what to say to different people." Bergs again smiled. "But that can't be avoided. Men must sometimes have masculine conversation," he said. Pierre was shown into the little drawing room, where it was impossible to sit down without destroying the symmetry, neatness, and order. So it was quite understandable and not to be wondered at that Berg should magnanimously offer to sacrifice the symmetry of an armchair or sofa for his esteemed guests, and then, finding himself in a painful state of indecision, leave the visitor to decide for himself the question of where to sit. Pierre moved the chair, disturbed the symmetry, and Berg and Vera launched their soiree by immediately interrupting each other in an effort to entertain their guests. Having decided in her own mind that Pierre ought to be entertained with conversation about the French embassy, Vera embarked on this subject. Berg, who had decided that masculine conversation was what was required, interrupted his wife with some observations about the war in Austria, and from his general subject instinctively switched to personal considerations of the proposals made to him to take part in the Austrian campaign, and his reasons for declining them. Although the conversation was extremely incoherent, and Vera resented the intrusion of the masculine element, both husband and wife felt with satisfaction that, even if only one guest was present, their soiree had begun very well, and was as like to every other soiree as two peas in a pod, with the same tea, talk, and lighted candles. Before long, Boris, Berg's old comrade, arrived. There was a trace of superiority and condescension in his manner to Berg and Vera. After Boris came the colonel and his lady, then the general himself, then the Rostov, and by then the party had become unquestionably like every other soiree. Berg and Vera could not repress their smiles of satisfaction at the sight of all this stirred in their drawing room. All the bowing and courtesy, the rustling of dresses, the disconnected talk, it was all just as it was everywhere else, and this was especially true of the general, who admired the apartment, patted Berg on the shoulder, and with paternal authority insisted on arranging the table for Boston. He sat down beside Count Ilya Andreevitch as the guest ranking next to in importance to himself. The older guests sat together, the younger together, and the hostess at the tea table, on which there were exactly the same kind of cakes in a silver cake basket as the Peninins had had at their party. Everything, in fact, was just as it was everywhere else. Chapter 21. Pierre, as one of the most distinguished guests, was obliged to sit down to Boston with Count Ilya Andreevitch, General, and the Colonel. From where he sat at the card table he could see Natásha, and was struck by the curious change that had come over her since the night of the ball. She scarcely spoke, and not only was she less pretty than she had been at the ball, but she would have looked positively plain had it not been for her look of benign indifference to everything about her. "What is the matter with her?" Pierre wondered, glancing at her. She was sitting by her sister at the tea table, and reluctantly, without even looking at him, making some reply to Boris, who sat down beside her. After playing out a whole suit, and to his partner's satisfaction, taking 5 tricks, Pierre, hearing greetings and the sound of someone entering the room, again glanced at Natásha as he picked up his tricks. What has happened to her? He asked himself, still more amazed. Prince Andrei was standing before her, saying something to her with a look of guarded tenderness. She had raised her head and was looking up at him, blushing and visibly trying to control her rapid breathing, and the radiance of some inner fire that before had been extinguished glowed anew in her. She was transformed. From a plain girl she had again become what she had been at the ball. Prince Andrei went up to Pierre, and Pierre noticed a new and youthful expression in her friend's face. Pierre changed places several times in the course of the game, sitting now with his back to Natasha, now facing her. In the course of the six rubbers he played continued, observed him and his friend. There is something very serious happening between them, thought Pierre, and his mixed feelings of joy and bitterness so agitated him that they made him neglect the game. After six rubbers, the general got up, saying that it was no use playing like that, and Pierre was released. Natasha had turned aside and was talking to Sonia and Boris. Vera smiling archly and was saying something to Prince Andrei. Pierre went up to his friend, asked whether they were talking secrets, and sat down beside him. Pierre had noticed Prince Andrei's attention to Natasha, decided that at a real soiree, some delicate allusions to the tender passions were indispensable, and seizing a moment when Prince Andrei was alone, started a conversation with him about the emotions in general, and about her sister. With so intellectual a guest as she considered Prince Andrei to be, she felt that she had to exercise the art of diplomacy. When Pierre joined them, he saw that Vera was being carried away by her own complacent talk, while Prince Andrei seemed embarrassed, a thing that really rarely happened to him. "What is your opinion?" Varus was saying with a subtle smile. "You are so discerning, Prince. You can fathom a person's character at once. What do you think of Natalia? Is she capable of being constant in her attachments? Could she, like other women, Vera meant herself, love a man once and for all and remain forever true to him? That is what I consider real love. What do you think, Prince?" "I know your sister too little," replied Prince Andrei with a sardonic smile, behind which he had tried to hide his embarrassment, "to be able to decide so delicate a question. And then I have noticed," he added, looking up at Pierre, who was approaching them, "that the less attractive a woman is, the more constant she is likely to be." "Yes, that is true, Prince. In our days," Prince Vera continued, speaking of our days as people of limited intelligence generally do, imagining they have discovered and evaluated the peculiarities of our day, and that human characteristics change with times. "In our day a girl had so much freedom that the pleasure of being courted often stifles real feelings in her, and Natalia, it must be confessed, is very susceptible in this regard." This recurrence of the subject of Natasha caused Prince Andrei to frown with displeasure. He was about to rise, but Vera continued with a still more subtle smile. "I think no one has been more courted than she said. But never till quite recently has she cared very seriously for anyone. Of course, you know, Count," she turned to Pierre, "even our dear cousin Boris, who, entre nos, has journeyed rather deep into the realm of la tendresse." She was alluding to the map of love in vogue at the time. Prince Andrei frowned and remained silent. "You and Boris are friends, are you not?" asked Vera. "Yes, I know him." "I expect he has told you of his childish love for Natasha, hasn't he?" "Oh, was there a childish love?" suddenly asked Prince Andrei, blushing unexpectedly. "Yes, you know the intimacy between cousins after leads to love. L'occasion est une delice, don't you agree?" "Undoubtedly," said Prince Andrei, and with an abrupt and unnatural vivacity he began joking with Pierre about the necessity of being circumspect in his relations with his 50-year-old cousins in Moscow. And in the midst of these jesting remarks he got up, and taking Pierre's hand, drew him aside. "Well, what is it?" asked Pierre, wondering at his friend's unwonted animation, and perceiving the glance he turned on Natasha as he rose. "I must have a talk with you," said Prince Andrei. "You know that pair of women's gloves?" He was referring to the Masonic gloves given to the newly initiated brother to be entrusted to the woman he loved. "I but no one I will talk to you later." And with a strange light in his eyes and a restlessness in his movements, Prince Andrei went to Natasha and sat down beside her. Pierre saw that Prince Andrei asked her something and that she blushed as she replied, But at that moment Berg came to Pierre and insisted that he should take part in the discussion between the general and the colonel on the situation in Spain. Berg was satisfied and happy. His face wore a constant smile of delight. The party was a great success, and exactly like every other soiree he had ever seen. Everything was the same. The ladies' refined conversations, the cards, the general raising his voice over the game, the samovar and the tea cakes. Only one thing was lacking that he had always seen at soirees, and which he wished to duplicate. There had not yet been a vociferous conversation among the men disputing some important intellectual matter. Now the general had started such a discussion, and Berg was drawing Pierre into it. And I'm going to leave off there. Thank you for watching. Please give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Leave a comment below or subscribe. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.